the pacing of the comic, like I really feel like it's almost like as if you're watching a wrestling match. Like there's a lot of beats in this comic that really make you feel like with the announcers talking, the crowd, the interference going on sometimes, the crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
it's
like that was
really
something that was really important for me. Like, I wanted, like, because obviously, like, I've read a lot of wrestling comics. I've read like some good ones, I've read some bad ones, but I felt there was like an opening to do, like, I really kind of do something kind of puts people in like in the middle of like a wrestling match and kind of the psychology and the pacing of that to a degree that's not really been done in comics before.
Hey guys, welcome back to another interview here on Toned In Entertainment. Today, we're going to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean today because my first guest from across the other side of the pond is comic book writer John Lees. How are you doing, John?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for staying up with us. I mean, it's a 5 hour time difference
Yeah, 500.
over there.
It's now midnight here.
Yeah, you're ready to go to bed. I'm just getting home from work, but we're going to make this interview happen.
The wonders of technology.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Now, how I came across you was the Crimson Cage. I'm a huge wrestling fan. I mean, that's what primarily this channel is. I love comic books, and I read the Crimson Cage. And then I had to see, like, okay, who wrote this? And then from there, I'm like, wait a minute. I've like read other stuff that you've also written, which we're gonna get to. But this being a wrestling channel, I think we should dive into the Crimson Cage right
Happy to
away.
do so.
Like, okay, what was your thought process going into creating such an awesome story like that?
Well, for anyone who doesn't know, the Crimson Cage, to give like the quick pitch, is a retelling of William Shakespeare's Macbeth set against the backdrop of 1980s territory pro wrestling. So it tells the story of Chuck Frenzy, who is the main event star of this small Louisiana promotion, kind of beloved local hero, but a big fish in a small pond. And he's kind of like itching to kind of advance his station and make a bigger move in his career, and a fateful encounter in the bayou tells him that he may be destined to become the next world champion if he's willing to do terrible things to make that happen. And the kind of like thinking of it was that I've always loved wrestling, like way back, like I think maybe back like the early '90s, like the Royal Rumble in 1992 was like my kind of like first memory of like like seeing a wrestling show, and I was obsessed ever since then. And as long as I've been making comics, I wanted to do like a wrestling comic. I didn't know that was something I thought would be kind of like to bring my two loves together, and I kind of had an idea of doing some kind of story set like in like the 80s territory era, because I think that's such a, even though that was a little bit before my time, I think it's a fascinating period of history. It's like transitional and like lots of things like were shifting around in the landscape. And I thought like, so I just didn't know what the story would be. So that kind of like went in the back burner for a little bit. And then like I think it was around the time I'd seen like the 2015 remake of Macbeth, the one with Michael Fassbender in it, and I loved that. And that reminded me of how much I loved Macbeth as a kid in school and stuff. And then like I saw Throne of Blood by Akira Kurosawa, and that became one of my favorite movies. And I started thinking like, well, if I was to do like a retelling of Macbeth the way that this movie did, because for anyone who doesn't know, Throne of Blood kind of like remakes Macbeth but sets it in feudal Japan with like samurai and stuff. And I thought, like, what would my version of like a retell of Macbeth be? And then like kind of thought about this thing in the back burner, but always wanted to do a wrestling story. And then kind of like two things kind of like went together really well. And I was thinking, wow, this actually all fits really neatly when you start to think about it. Like the little plot beats all start to kind of take shape. And yeah, and then the rest is history. I just kind of like all started kind of like taking shape from there.
What I like about it is like you don't have to be, I mean, it really helps to be a pro wrestling fan to like really dive into this comic because as somebody who's watched wrestling from the territory days from the 80s, like I got a lot of the references, the four horsemen ish type thing that's going on there is pretty cool. It's kind of like, oh, I should say faction. I mean, I don't not necessarily want to say four horsemen, but like the faction
No,
thing
yeah,
that's
no,
good.
the Four Horsemen was undoubtedly a big
It
like
is
connection.
okay.
Yeah.
But like you put like this supernatural twist to it that's like you don't really have to understand pro wrestling to jump into the Crimson Cage. But it definitely, if you're a pro wrestling fan, I think you would absolutely love something like this. And what I really liked about it was the pacing of the comic. Like it's Wednesday night. I'm about to watch AEW once we get
Yeah,
done.
yeah. I'm up late. I might watch as well. Sometimes I can fall asleep while it's on, but
Right.
I
Yeah,
might stick
it's on in
on.
about 45 minutes from now. I'm gonna watch
Yeah.
AEW now. But like the pacing of the comic, like I really feel like it's almost like as if you're watching a wrestling match. Like there's a lot of beats in this comic that really make you feel like with the announcers talking, the crowd, the interference going on sometimes, the crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
it's
like that was
really
something that was really important for me. Like, I wanted, like, because obviously, like, I've read a lot of wrestling comics. I've read like some good ones, I've read some bad ones, but I felt there was like an opening to do, like, like really kind of do something that kind of puts people in like in the middle of like a wrestling match and kind of the psychology and the pacing of that to a degree that's not really been done in comics before. Because often what happens when you read a wrestling comic is you have the plot stuff, you have the character stuff, and then it's like, okay, let's stop the plot for a bit and just have a page of like, three stationary shots of like people doing wrestling moves, and then they go back to like the story after the match is done, and like that's kind of like two separate things. And I thought, why don't we make the matches integral to the storytelling? Let's have like the character dynamics playing out over the course of the narrative. So you have like the story of the match is in like the heels and faces, but then you also have like these real people who are like sometimes friends, sometimes they're rivals, and there's power plays going on, and the power dynamic shifting over the course of the match, and you're seeing like different layers of fiction unfolding. You have like the heel fighting the babyface, then you also have like people trying to undermine each other or trying to get one up on each other in the course of the matches and make the other person look bad. And Alex Cormack, who's the artist of the book, he had a really clever kind of like visual sort of like technique he uses where if you look at the kind of like camera angles, I'm not sure that's the word to use for comics, but like camera angles, you know what I mean? Um, whenever like he's framing like a shot, like from the audience POV, like 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 our POVs inside the audience looking at the ring from the outside, that is like we're watching the match, we're watching the story. Oh, here's like the kind of like the evil world champion like fighting the babyface challenger. We're watching the story play out. But whenever kind of like our POV, the camera's inside the ring, like like with the competitors, like we're stepped behind the curtain and we're seeing the real people interacting with each other, and you're seeing like them whispering to each other, say like next spot coming up, like or things aren't supposed to go this way. What are you doing? Like, and then so it's kind of like fun playing with those kind of like layers of fiction and reality, and kind of like peeling apart, kind of like whole divide between the two.
now as a writer, when I mean you obviously have like a vision for what's going into the comic. How does it work with like the artist that really puts this together? Like, let's specifically stay on like the Crimson Cage because like you have a visual for like pro wrestling and your story. Like, is something like that like when you finally see how the pages look, does it kind of come out the way you visioned it, or is it maybe below your expectations?
I mean, it can vary depending on like the situation and the story. I mean, I have done time. There's been times when I've like written a script and I've had no idea who's going to be drawing it, like because you're like the artist can get picked later on. And there's other times when I've known exactly who the artist is going to be and you're writing for that artist, and I prefer that scenario. And with Alex Cormack in particular, like we've worked together going back years and years. Like before the Crimson Cage, we did Sync, which we're still doing. Sync's coming back later this year, which is a kind of like Glasgow crime, horror, pulp noir series. So we kind of like developed a strong relationship from that. And even before that, we did a serial killer thriller comic called Oxymoron, Love Waste Nightmare. So we've been working together like for years. And it's actually at the point now that whenever I come up with an idea, like in my head, like I'm imagining it as drawn by Alex, just as a kind of like default. And sometimes like I have to train myself and like think of somebody else because Alex can't draw everything. And like, so like it is good when you have that kind of rapport with an artist where like you're writing stuff and you're imagining how he would do it, and because you know the pacing that Alex uses, or you know the kind of like shots he likes to use, or the kind of like focusing characters, or the angles he likes to play with. You're writing to Alex's style, and you're starting like you're writing like you do this or do something that he did in this other comic we worked on, and becomes kind of like part of the whole kind of like dance of the creative process. Is like, tailoring something almost a bit like wrestling, actually, like, where the other guy's spots and you're kind of like working them into the story, and so it's a bit like that kind of. So I think like when you can like have a partner that you can play to their strengths and work with, it makes it a more fun experience.
Now, you said that you've read some good wrestling comics and that you've read some bad wrestling comics. And I'll name one of each for me, but can I ask you to name one good wrestling
I'm not
comic and
going to
one
name
bad?
any bad wrestling
Okay, okay,
comics
okay.
because I know that every comic like takes an amount of work to do, and I don't want to. I mean, obviously, like if I was going to name one really bad one, it'd probably like the Ultimate Warrior one from back in the day. But well, I mean, but we're talking about like the present day, like
That was my choice. That
um,
was my choice for the bad one.
but in terms of like the present landscape and stuff, everyone's like working hard and they're all coming from a good place, like, and the standards actually been really high lately. Like in wrestling comics across the board, there's a whole bunch, but I kind of having a little bit of a moment right now in terms of quality wrestling comics. And if I was to name one really good one that's came out around this time, it would do a Power Bomb by Daniel Warren Johnson.
That was good.
He
Yeah,
was
I
like
read that one.
yeah, I mean Daniel Warren Johnson was already like before that book, like he was like one of like the best creators in comics. Where anytime his name is in something, you're going to read it. So then when I heard it was in a wrestling comic, it was like even better, like So, yeah, like that was something I really loved and really enjoyed. So kudos to him for that.
Yeah, I think mine would be I'll keep it here, the old WCW comic book from like the 12 issues. I love that. I was a huge WCW fan. And that Ultimate Warrior one, I actually reviewed it like about a month ago. I actually got the fourth and final issue. Oh my God, I don't know what the heck happened there. But I do appreciate you having some like respect for other artists and you understand like what goes into creating comics and not one to name a bad one. And I do respect that, but I think we'll stick with the Warrior one. Maybe that'll be our
Yeah,
mutual
yeah,
one.
yeah. I mean, I don't think he even knew they was even making that book. So,
That one I told my wife, I'm like, I'm in pain. I'm in like literal pain trying to finish reading this one. Like,
from parts unknown.
oh wow, that was something else. Now, speaking of other comic book series you've worked on, one that I read kind of when the pandemic was coming out was Hotel. And I
Yeah,
read series one, which was 4 issues, and then I was super excited when season two was coming out, or series two. I don't know how you
yeah.
describe it,
Or
but
volume two, we call it in the
volume
comics
two.
world.
Okay,
Yeah,
so volume one was 4 issues, and volume two was 5 issues long.
yeah.
So when you pitch the idea for like Hotel, is it something that like the publisher says, "Hey, we're going to give you 5 issues to do this one," or do you say, "Hey, I have the story for 5 issues"? How does that all come together?
I think it was like a little bit of both. Like, where Hotel was an interesting experience. That was kind of like maybe like my first experience of like, talking to a publisher and then like being actively interested in like working with me and going, right, let's come up with something that you can do. Like, because normally what happens is like I'll come up with a pitch for something on my own and then I'll try and shop it around to editors and like, like and desperately try and get someone to listen. And I've said this analogy before, but for me, if like writing a comic is like having a baby. And it's like, you've put a part of yourself into something and you have all this love for it and you have all these hopes for it. Pitching a comic is like taking that baby and putting it inside the hamster ball and rolling it onto the motorway and hoping it makes it to the other side intact. So like, but like working with like AWA Studios on Hotel kind of took the pressure off because I had a meeting with Axel Alonso, who was like the kind of chief editor there back in 2018, and he was like, "Yeah, we love Sync, we love the stuff that you're doing. Let's work together." Send us some ideas, and based on that conversation, he was like, I really like the idea of you doing like another anthology type thing, like Sync, and I love the idea of like something set like an old roadside hotel. I think he was thinking like a noir, like in a hotel, but my mind went to horror because like that's where I naturally go for things. So like Hotel, for anyone who doesn't know, is kind of like anthology horror series about this old roadside hotel off Route 66. Officially, it doesn't exist. You won't find it on any map. But if you're traveling alone and you're truly desperate for sanctuary or secrecy, perhaps you'll see a sign in the road that will take you there. But yes, we did volume one, which was 4 issues, and that did really well. I think it was one of the biggest titles of AWA's launch, so they were keen to do more. based on the response. And yeah, they said like they were open for 5 issues, like, if I wanted to do it, and then I pitched an idea for 5 issues, and yeah, they were happy to go for it. So getting that little extra issue of wiggle room was nice.
Now, my personal favorite issue in Hotel was Volume 3 of Series 2, or I'm sorry, issue number 3 of Volume 2,
Is
which
that the
was,
one with the sketchbook?
oh my God, it was fantastic. I love the fact of like, without giving too much away, just how
Yeah,
like
well, the
people
basic
can.
premise is it's like an artist like who has a sketchbook and he draws this kind of like cursed painting of a clown that's in the hotel lobby in his sketchbook. And after he draws that, like nothing in the sketchbook comes out right. He draws it, and then like how he draws it becomes like really warped and twisted. And that seems to then have an effect on like the item he has drawn becomes twisted the way he has drawn it. Um, Funny story about the development of that, when like Dalla Bortali, the artist, he sent me in the pages for that, and he said the first pages that had like the artist drawn, I was like, oh, really good job on the artist. You've made him look like a real sleazy scumbag dick, like, really good job. And Dalla goes, actually, it was based on me. So I was like, oh, he's handsome as well. Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mention
Now, what I love about Hotel is, it's one of those kind of things, and I love stories like this where it's
yeah,
kind of like, you know, it's the first volume was 4 issues, and each issue is its own individual story. But kind of
yeah.
like when it wraps up, or in each issue that comes out, you're like, oh my God, this happened. This goes back to issue number one, but it's telling separate stories, but these people's lives kind of like all intertwine, like with what's going on, and it all comes together. And each issue, you're like, oh my God, okay, this makes sense from the last issue and whatnot. So, how difficult or how challenging or maybe how fun is it to come up with
I
like kind
actually
of like a story like
really,
that?
yeah, I really enjoy the anthology model. Like, I do it for Hotel. I also do it for Sync as well. And on something I'm currently writing, I'm doing the same thing. Actually, there's a number of reasons why I really enjoy it. Like one, here in the UK, there's a real strong tradition of like anthology stories, like one shots and standalones and TV. Like there's a lot of shows like Inside Number Nine, or Black Mirror and stuff like that. But obviously the US has a strong history of as well with the Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt. Like I've always just loved that kind of like in and out, tell a story. For comics in particular, I think that when you're working, especially when you're working in like the indie market or the create your own market, and you're not doing like big licensed superheroes like Spider-Man or Batman or whatever, what tends to happen is um, people will jump on for issue one of a series. And if they miss issue one, they go, oh, well, I can't get caught up now. I have to wait for the trade, or I'm going to have to wait for the graphic novel collection, or just have to skip the series because I can't get caught up. So I thought I really love the idea of I love the idea of creating a series where someone can like pick up any issue. They can walk in at their comic shop and see like Hotel issue 4 or issue 3 or whatever, and they can like the cover and go, that looks interesting, and they can pick it up and they can get a full story without having to go back and read issue one, And I like the idea that every issue is its own story. However, if you have been reading the whole thing, you are rewarded for having read the whole thing because it's a richer experience and things come back. So hopefully the ideal scenario is that somebody like will pick up an issue and it's a good standalone read, but it makes them want to go back and read the rest of the series. And when they do go back and read the rest of the series, they get lots of extra details and added context, which makes it a richer whole. And as another note, especially when you're working in like the horror, suspense, thriller terrain, like Hotel, one of the fun things about doing an anthology series is that there's no guarantee that the main character is going to survive and live it to the next issue. Like things can have a bad ending, which adds extra suspense and extra tension. And just for the sake of variety as well, I think it's quite fun that doing this kind of model lets you tell different types of stories. You can introduce like a new set of characters every issue. You can do different tones. You can have like a really dark and grim and bleak story, or you can have a kind of like funny, zany comedy horror, like a creep show vibe, or you can do like something that's quite sad and quite emotional, like the story with the dog that we had in issue 4. Like, it gives you a bit of freedom to kind of like play with different things and different tones and different types of story, but all still being contained under the umbrella of like this world, so all kind of feels part of a whole.
Now I'm here in Florida, and unfortunately, comic book shops are something that is very bleak right now. Like the one that was
Yeah.
closest to me, closed down about a year and a half ago, which like during the pandemic and right before the pandemic, I got hooked on reading comics. Like, and it was like my joy. It was like me going to Toys R Us again as a kid, like going to the comic book store, and that's how I discovered a lot of comics was just by seeing the cover. I
Yeah.
don't really get that same feel now, like when I go to Comixology and just like swipe
Yeah.
through and see
Yeah.
whatever. Like, how is what are the challenges now with getting your book out to the masses, to people that normally wouldn't see it here in 2023?
It's difficult because comics is a hard market to get a foothold in and to kind of like because like the way comics work is that like we don't sell directly as creators or as publishers, we don't sell directly to the customer. We sell to retailers and comic shops, and then comic shops will order in stock and they should then sell to the customers. But like, for us, like the order numbers come from how much retailers order. So like we're kind of like selling this book like, a month before like it's actually due for shops. We're like wanting the orders to come in, and then like, so let's say somebody the week a book comes out, maybe someone will message me on social media, like a friend or something, of like, oh, how do I go about supporting your comic and getting it in my comic shop? You go, well, you have to travel back in time like 2 months, like to more doing pre-orders and get it then. So it's difficult like markets. So you really have to kind of like do a lot of like proactive work. And on my end of things, like when I have a new book coming out, I will send like thousands of emails to comic shops like all over the world. Like have a big master list, and I will individually reach out to every shop. Like, I've messaged some shops in Florida, and like, sometimes you don't hear anything, or a lot of the time you don't hear anything back. But you do get people replying and saying, yeah, thanks for reaching out. We're going to support your book, or we were already supporting your books, and that's always good to hear. But I know from experience, because I've been messaging people, I have this contact list, that every so often you'll see like you'll get an email bounce back, and then you'll look online, you'll see that shop's closed and it's not there anymore. And that's always sad, especially if it's a comic shop that you know has supported you and has taken a chance in your work and believed in you. Like this guy in Scotland on the other side of the world, and like this shop in America decided like, to believe in your story and give it a chance. So it's really sad, like when you find that they've not made it through or they've had to close down. But the only thing I'd say is that as much as I see um, shops closing and disappearing, there's also always new shops opening up, and like there's always like, like, so I think that as long as there are people who believe in comics and people who are passionate about comics, there are going to be people who are like wanting to kind of like get in this crazy like, very must be very fraught and difficult market of comic shops. And so yeah, like, yeah, it's difficult and yeah, there's challenges, but no, I think that like, oh,
Okay.
did my profound point there got get
Yeah.
lost?
Let me make sure. I think we're still recording. Yeah, we're still recording. Okay.
I finished like my big kind of like rousing monologue, and then you were like frozen like this.
Like,
It
hey.
was like that really must have flopped, and then just vanished. As it always frozen.
No, like for me, like I had to make the transition to digital because my closest comic book store now is 12 miles, and in Florida, 12 miles, that's like 45 minutes away to a
Yeah.
comic book shop, which is not something that's doable after work or whatever. So it's like I had to make the transition to digital, which there's still nothing like opening the book and reading it. I still feel like that's the best way to experience a comic. And I know a lot of stuff now also gets put on like Comixology Unlimited. How does that work with you guys where people can like Hotel Volume 2 is now on unlimited? Like,
Well, my opinion is the more ways people can get hold of your comic, the better. Like, if someone can go to a comic shop and get it, that's great. If someone can go on Comixology and download it, that's great. If someone can go on Amazon and order the collection, that's great. Like for me, like I know sometimes folk will message me and say, "Oh, what way gets you like the most money, or what way gets you this or that." Obviously, I like money, but but I think the most important thing is that beyond all else, I want if someone wants to read my comic, I want them to be able to get their hands on my comic, like whatever way they read books, like So yeah, like whatever model like is out there, I'm just glad that there's options, there's a variety, and there's choices.
Now you also do conventions too, as well.
Yeah. Well,
How
I've
important?
started kind of like the ball has started rolling again. For a little while there, like I wasn't doing anything. Like obviously when the pandemic hit, that kind of like put an end to a lot of like my convention traveling. Like and all through 2020, I did nothing. My first convention back was like Thought Bubble here in the UK in 2021, and that again, that was the only show I did in 2022. But this year, I've finally started looking into like travel again and like getting back out to the US for the first time since 2019. So I'm going to be at Heroes Con as a guest in this coming June in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the Charlotte Convention Center. So that's I think it's the weekend of I want to say the 14th to the 16th of June. That might not be exact, but it's
Okay.
about that time. And yeah, then hopefully, like I might be doing more US shows after that if that goes well.
Okay. Now, when I reached out to you about 2 weeks ago to set up this interview, I had just finished reading a comic book that you is new out on shelves or in Comixology or wherever you get your comics at, and that's The Nasty.
Yeah,
And again, when I read the book, again, I'm an 80s, 90s guy. I love horror movies. I love nostalgia. And I love the whole like renting video type concept. Like, Netflix just announced like 2 days ago, they're going out of
yeah, I
business
saw
with it.
that.
I shed a few tears because I still have a Netflix right
End of an
envelope service. Yeah,
era.
it's the end of an era. So you have the nasty out. And again, that's when I read it. I was like, oh man, this comic's really good. Let me see who wrote this. Because I'm not one that looks at, some people follow their favorite writer. I look at
Yeah.
stories, interesting stuff,
Yeah.
then read it. Then I'm like, okay, this name sounds familiar. I'm like, okay, he wrote The Crimson Cage. He wrote Hotel. Let me reach out
Like
to
a
you.
bad smell, keep on
Yeah,
coming back.
yeah, exactly. I love it. So the nasty. Okay, let's get into that. Like I know episode 2 is about ready to come out.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, The Nasty is a coming of age horror comedy set in 1990s Scotland against the backdrop of the video nasties moral panic, which was a big thing here in the UK, where like the right wing press, along with the government and various moral crusaders, were trying to ban like various like horror movies on home video. Essentially, it was like the kind of British cousin to the Satanic Panic, which was happening in the US in the 80s around the same time. Um, and yeah, so set against that kind of backdrop, that kind of cultural backdrop, and it tells the story of Thumper Connell, who is this kind of lonely, horror loving kid who still has his imaginary friend from childhood who happens to be the star of his favorite slasher movie, Red Ennis. So Thumper and various other local misfits kind of gather at the local video shop to watch banned horror movies from the Video Nasties list on the sly. And they kind of hatch a scheme to try and save the local video shop from closure. And it involves acquiring this copy of this rare, elusive Video Nasty, the most widely banned and cursed of them all. And things take some unexpected turns once they try and watch it.
Now, did you ever join in? And is this kind of like based maybe on a real story of yours, or
I would say it's my most personal comic that I've ever done. It's a little bit kind of different time wise, where like Thumper's like a teenager in 1994. I was still like a little kid in 1994, so I'm not quite that era. But yeah, like there's definitely a kind of like an autobiographical element in terms of like my love of horror and like. I grew up like the story's set in Rutherglen, which is where I grew up. And there was a video shop in Rutherglen Main Street. It wasn't Monster Dome Video, it was just called Video World. And it was very permissive, like in terms of like the kind of content it was given out. Because if you remember, like before the days of like Blockbuster or Global Video, which was the UK equivalent, a lot of these video shops were like mom and pop stores. Like, no, they were little kind of like small businesses. So what these people stocked was down to like their individual tastes. And like this local video shop of mine, Video World, was very horror heavy. Like they had all the horror movie like placards and standees and posters on the wall. So that was kind of like my earliest days of like movie education was immersed in horror. So I would like as like 5 years old, I would like walk down to this video shop, which was like a 5 minute straight line walk from my house. So I was allowed to walk down there and come back again, you know. So I would go down to the video shop and I would come back home with a copy of like Peter Pan and Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, like, you know, something like that, or Maniac Cop, Badge of Silence, or something like this, you know. So I was like watching all this stuff from like a really young age, and like, you know, so for me, like, I started to associate like, you know, horror not with like being scary or forbidden or like, you know, bad, but it was like kind of like comfort for me. It was like pure imagination and it was like, you know, that was like my equivalent of like escaping away. That kind of like fun make believe world was a world with like teenagers getting brutally murdered by masked killers, you know. That was like my childhood happy place. I never had an imaginary friend, but I remember as a kid I did often daydream about how cool it would be if Michael Myers was my pal. So I think that's kind of like where Red Ennis comes from.
That was actually in my notes to ask you if you've ever had an imaginary friend.
No, no, no. Like I did watch Drop Dead Fred a lot as a kid, so I wished I had an imaginary friend, but no, I didn't.
Hmm. Now, is there any other future projects you have going on besides the nasty, or is like the nasty like really where you're
Well,
focused at right now?
the nasty is like my big thing that's coming out like you know this because like there's an 8 issue series. Issue one's just launched, so that's going to take me through the rest of the year. And like it's from Vault Comics, who are a really big publisher right now, so it's like the biggest book they've ever done. So I'm feeling like a lot of like desire to focus on that and promote that. But there is other things coming out. I've got volume three of Sync coming out this year. Sync with Alex Cormack, the artist of the Crimson Cage. So like we've had a little bit of a hiatus from Sync. We did volume one and two. They got a lot of critical buzz, but then we kind of took a break to focus on the Crimson Cage and the pandemic held things back as well. So we did a little kind of like graphic novel called Dig, which kind of like explored the backstory of one of our fan favorite characters. But now we're coming back with volume three proper. We just ran a Kickstarter campaign for the first issue of that. And so that's going to be hitting comic shops towards the back end of this year. So yeah, look out for more sync coming. And yeah, I'm developing a couple of other things, writing a couple of other things that can't be shared right now, but watch this space for those coming out as well.
Now, when I tell people like that I still read comics, automatically they assume that I'm reading Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, that kind of stuff. I
And
really
they're
don't.
all good right now as well.
Right. But for me, like
know.
I don't really dive into the superhero stuff because I feel like a lot of the stuff I've read before, or it's just a lot. There's a lot to do in limited time. And for me, I'm actually drawn more to the indie stories because I feel like they're a little bit more passionate, they're a little bit more creative, and I think they have to be in order to sell. Now, could you ever see some, and a lot of these stories, I think could fit like maybe like a Netflix series or something like that. Could you see?
I mean, like obviously that's something like this. Like obviously, like I mean, it's been announced like a while back that Hotel was optioned for film. Like El Callahan is going to be writing and directing it. So like that's all very early days, but like we're excited about that. That'll be fun to see that take shape. And yeah, like like obviously there's these things like where we all have daydreams about like oh I mean I try not to think like my opinion is like I'm happy if the book's a comic. Like I'm not writing a comic thinking it'll be a film. Like if it's a comic, I'm imagining it as a comic. But like you can't help yourself but think, fantasy cast someone in your head. I think it would be great if this actor was doing this. So you'll imagine something cinematically. Like, I think it's like natural. And yeah, that's something I'm always open to see happening with my stories.
I think that'd be very cool. Now, since you are a big wrestling fan, I would like to ask you maybe what is your first wrestling memory? I think we all have like that memory as a child that really
Oh wow.
caught your imagination.
That's difficult. I did say the Royal Rumble 1992, but I think even before that, I was a bit of a wrestling fan. Even like even earlier than that, I remember having like an Andre the Giant action figure from like Wave One of like the WWF, like like
The big plastic one or the like the huge.
no, the kind of like small one, they kind of like
Oh,
wobbled up the head button action. I remember that, I remember thinking like I want to see like, what this is all about, all these I want to see the TV show that has these action figures. and there was like I remember going to my uncle's house because he was the only person in the family that had like Sky TV satellite, which is where they showed wrestling. So we went to uncle's house and I watched WWF Superstars. And the first ever wrestling match that I ever saw in 1991 was Sid Justice like versus some jobber. And he murdered him like so. I was like, this is what wrestling is. This is cool. And then obviously I watched like the Battle Royal at the Royal Albert Hall, which was a big British event. I remember loving that. And then yeah, the Best Assistive Murder or Rumble 92. And I went through a lot and again, like it was all through my childhood I was watching this. Like I remember for years I was like a pure Bret Hart fan. I loved Bret Hart. I was never a Hulkamaniac. I think like I was coming in and Hulkamania was kind of on the way. And so like Bret Hart was like my favorite, and then like, he became world champion. And I remember feeling literally like aggrieved and like devastated when Yokozuna, like took the world championship from him. Like, how could he? And then like even like, and I remember like I was a weird kid where like even when Austin 316 was coming up, I remember thinking I was like really angry for Bret Hart. I was like, like how could these people be turning on Bret Hart? Like, and how could they be turning on him for Steve Austin? Like, Austin's the bad guy and Bret Hart's the good guy. Like, what are you doing? Like, so I was like that. But yeah, like like I've my favorites have shifted over the years. Currently, like my favorite since like 2006 has been Brian Danielson. So I've been nice following his career and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I carried all the way through from like young childhood to present day.
It's so funny how we take things with our favorite wrestlers so personal.
Yeah.
Like you take the Bret Hart, which was a horrible, horrible, despicable thing they did with him losing to Yokozuna, then
Yeah.
Hogan running, and you're not a
Yeah, no,
Hulkamaniac.
yeah, as someone who was like, even before I knew that wrestling was fake, whatever, like, before I knew all that stuff, when I saw Hulk Hogan and I was like, get the fuck out of here, Hulk Hogan, what are you doing here? This isn't your spot.
It's so funny because I take that like Sting is my personal favorite of
Oh,
all
I love
time.
Sting, yeah.
Still,
Sting's one of my all-time favorites.
and
I
it's
still
like
I still remember the injustice of watching Sting carrying Big Van Vader on his back to the three posts in the strap match, and Vader stealing it from him at the last gasp to like throw him at the way and touch the last bit. Like, how could you do that, Vader?
yeah, it's like you have that memory of Bret Hart. I take that WrestleMania match of Sting very personal, where I was
Oh
like,
yeah, no,
how
like
the
I never
announcers
even
were
watched
just,
that WrestleMania. I was too disgusted after I heard the results.
oh my god, how the announcers just like downplayed him, and he was like just the bastard of WCW, and it was just like, yeah,
I'm so happy that like the Sting's had this last run in the EW. Like I mean, like the guy's like what, like 65 years old or something now,
close.
and yeah, no, sort of close to and without bias, without prejudice, I can say that no matter who the opponents are, if it's like Sting and Darby Allin or Sting, Darby Allin and someone else versus like another team, that match is going to be a banger without fail. Like, and like Sting's always like, great in them, like, and he's always doing some crazy spots, and he knows his limitations, he knows just enough to kind of like make people happy without like, doing too much or exposing himself, whatever. It's like masterful stuff. And like, I think he's done a great job.
Yeah, no, they're actually down here in Fort Lauderdale next
Yeah.
Wednesday. We got tickets. We're going to
Oh, cool. I'm
Dynamite
thinking.
next.
I'm trying to think if I can get tickets to Wembley for the in London.
Woo, that'll be good. That, oh my God, yeah, like, right.
Uh,
You think
I don't know if I'll be able to, but like, it's tempting.
yeah, you think that stadium will sell out like it did SummerSlam?
Well, here's my opinion. Like, I think there's a chance it might, but I think folk who say, "Oh, if it doesn't totally sell out, it's a failure." Like, I think that's nonsense. Like, I think if like as it was a 90,000 capacity for Wembley.
Something
Well, let's
crazy,
say
but
let's
yeah,
say it's 90,000. Even if they do 60,000, and a 90,000 building, that's still a huge show and it's their biggest numbers ever. Like, and it's better doing 60,000 in a 90,000 capacity arena than settling for like a full house at 20,000. I think, like, that's my opinion.
yeah. I feel like it's always going to be compared to SummerSlam, no matter what. It's a completely different time and era
Yeah,
in wrestling and everything
it's
else.
still going
Like,
to look awesome. Like the atmosphere, like and I think what's going to be awesome.
yeah, because I feel like once they travel to different locations, that's you get a different energy from the fans that are so used to seeing, like, you guys don't get AEW over there. I think this is the
Yeah,
first
no, we get
time,
we
right?
get it on TV here. It's actually funny thing is there's like whole like, I don't want to get into too much like the whole inside baseball, but in certain demographics, AEW is bigger here in the UK than WWE is because WWE is only shown on I don't think it's even in Sky anymore. I think it's like BT Sports, so it's like satellite. So you have it's like pay TV, like so you have to kind of it's only like if you buy the sports package that you can watch Monday Night Raw and all that stuff. Um, like even because we have the WWE Network here in the UK, but like even that only covers the pay-per-views. It doesn't cover like the weekly television. If you want to get that, you have to kind of like have this elite sports package, blah blah blah. AEW is shown on free TV on ITV, like so that means it's managed to pick up like a bigger audience than WWE has because it's more widely available. Like so it's like an interesting dynamic here in the UK. So if you actually look at the ratings and how much folk are actually watching AEW versus WWE, AEW has a stronger foothold in the UK than WWE right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out in the response at the live events.
It's so funny because I always hear people talk about the ratings and stuff like that, and it's like the way that people consume their television now is so differently
Yeah.
now. Just
I
like,
mean, like for me, I think like I was a TNA fan back in 2005, 2006, 2007, whatever. And I know from bitter experience that trying to chase the whims of like the ratings is like that way lies madness and despair because like doesn't tell you anything. It can change from week to week. And if you're trying to book your television around what had the highest quarterly demographic this week or that week, you're going to just like boot yourself into a hole. You have to have a vision and stick to it rather than doing that nonsense.
well, we know it's just MJF is the highest one because he told us so. So no matter what.
Okay, like, since we're off on a bit of a tangent anyway, I just want to say that my genuine opinion here, I know folk might think that this is insane, but I kind of feel that MJF right now is in his like late 1998, early 1999 rock period where it's like, clearly he's going to be the biggest babyface star who's the flagship person carrying this company, but they're still trying to make him be the heel, even though they kind of like the tide is turning and folk are starting to rail off him. Like, even when he insults people or he says these horrible things, it's like Eddie Guerrero's cheating now. Folk just like it, they expect it from him. So I think he's going to have another like year as like the top heel in the company's world champion, whatever. Once he loses the belt, I think he could come back and become like the flagship star, like the number one babyface, because he has breakout potential more than anybody else in the roster. I think, he can clearly people don't give him credit for this, but he can clearly wrestle great when he does it. Like that match with Brian Danielson was an instant classic. He can talk, he can do promos, but he can like be funny, he can sing, he can dance, he can do all this stuff. Like he can act if he wants to do that. Like he can be like a really top ambassador, like that can like maybe be a kind of like flagship player if they want him to be.
If he wants to be.
Yeah, he might not want. He might think he'd rather be a heel, like but like if he
I could,
genuinely, if he doesn't even need to become the pure like sly, like slapping hands, kissing babies, like he can just like if he just like softens the edges of his act just enough, like and like points like his worst barbs at like other heels rather than like like the fan favorites. You just as a slight tweak, you could make him into like the biggest sort of star, like flagship hero of the company.
oh no, I 100% agree. Now, I know it's late there and I don't want to keep you
Yeah.
too late because we're going to get on to watching some wrestling here.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
is there anything else we should touch on that you have coming down the pipeline? Some cool ideas you have in your head? Anything else that's going on?
All I would just do is wrap up with like the cheap plugs. Like if you're interested in any of these books we've talked about, whether it be the Crimson Cage, Hotel, Nasty. The Nasty you can get your local comic shop now, but any of these older books like Zinc, Hotel, Crimson Cage, you can go to your local comic shop. They'll probably be able to order them in for you. If not, go to Amazon, go to like online shops, or you can go to my online store at johnleescomics.bigcartel.com. International shipping can be a wee bit steep, but I will send it out to you if you're interested. And yeah, like, other than that, I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/John Lees, where I share original stories and behind the scenes content. I have a weekly newsletter, deepender.johnleescomics.com. That's deep-ender.johnleescomics.com. And you can find me on socials, at John Lees 927 on both Instagram and Twitter.
Perfect. Now, guys, if you are those of you who are still watching the video here, like, you're most likely wrestling fans, so I implore you to check out the Crimson Cage as a wrestling fan. But if you love 80s horror, the Nasty is super cool. Like, I love the blockbuster video feel to it, the underground, like the videotape rental, the 80s horror. It's so really cool. And Hotel, I mean, these are the three that I've read, and they're just fantastic reads. You can sit down and just like read them cover to cover. Hotel's got that mystery, that hey, I saw this, I saw this. It's all coming together. Just fantastic read. So, John, definitely keep up the great work. I can't wait to see more things from you down the future. I'm going to keep up with the Nasty because I was floored by issue number 1. It's what got me to reach out to you and
Well,
look you
we've
up.
got some crazy things coming up, so keep
Oh,
on
I,
reading.
I can't wait. I can't wait. So, guys, definitely check out the work of John Lees. It's really awesome. And support your local comics. Take a chance. Read a comic. You never know what little hidden gems might be out there.
I agree.
All
I'm
right, guys.
biased.
You are biased. That's okay. You're supposed to be biased. I'm not supposed to be, but I'm going to be biased and take a look at John Lee's comics. Is really, really, really cool stuff. So thank you so much, John, for joining me
Thanks so
here
much for
today.
having me. Great chatting with you.
Definitely. So, guys, if you like interviews like this with comic book writer John Lees, make sure you stay tuned in here to Toned In Entertainment for future videos. Subscribe to the channel. Do it. Go now. Do it now.